This happened to my dad when he was a teenager. I'm not sure if it's true, but he avoids Ouija boards like the plague and almost begs people never to use one. He lived in the middle of New York City, and the neighborhood wasn't a wonderful place. He and two friends, let's call them Jim and Terry, liked to hang out in graveyards and attempt little seances. Yes, it was a dumb thing to do, but they never got anything out of it. There was a spot in the main cemetery where they met up occasionally. It was like their secret spot to escape reality and simply hang with each other. It was on their way home from school, so it was never out of the way, and Terry usually drove. They decided to use a Ouija board one night and ask it some random questions. One of the questions was when Jim would die. The board answered with 1 week. They merely laughed it off and continued their lives as usual. Then one day after school, about a week later, when my dad walked to that spot to see if his friends were there, he saw Jim standing there in a panic. My dad ran up to him to see what was wrong. Jim was waiting for him and said something along the lines of, "Terry got in a bad car accident. I think he's dead. Run to his house and tell his parents." So my dad booked it to Terry's house and saw 2 cop cars parked on the curb. He ran inside and yelled, "Hey, I heard that Terry was hurt. Where is he? Is he all right? I saw Jim in the graveyard and he told me Terry was in a car accident." And then he noticed that Terry was standing right there with minor bruises. Terry, his parents, and the cops just stared at him. Terry said confusingly, "You saw who in the graveyard?" It turns out that a car accident did occur. Jim decided to ride home with Terry, and someone else hit them on the way. Terry was fine, but Jim didn't have his seatbelt on and took the full hit. The Ouija board was right after all. The experience I'm going to share scared the crap out of me. It happened almost 10 years ago when I was 21, and sometimes I still wonder just what exactly was going on. My best friend and I were both in a rough spot and looking for a place to move into immediately. We found this basement apartment close to downtown, not in a great part of town. Actually, it was a total dump, but it was a 2-bedroom for $550 a month, which made it worth it for a while until we could find a nicer place. A couple days after moving in, I started having really bad nightmares and waking up absolutely terrified, but couldn't remember what I was dreaming about. After about a week of these nightmares, every time I was in my room I felt like someone was going to bust right through my wall and kill me. The landlord had a storage area he could access on the other side of my bedroom wall. Since my room was larger and my friend's room was more like a large closet, she moved into my room with me. When I was taking my dog out back to go to the bathroom, I started noticing it always looked like someone on the top floor of the house was watching me. My roommate noticed this too when she came out back with me. Now me and my friend also had a mutual guy friend, and the 3 of us were always hanging out, and he stayed over at our place pretty often. One night we were all out together, and after a few drinks he decided to go home. My roommate and I stayed up a few hours until about 3 a.m.-ish, and realizing we were likely to sleep in, we went to take the dog out before going to sleep. I had the dog on her leash so she wouldn't chase after any rabbits in the yard. Standing by the door, I started to see shadows that looked like people walking towards me and my friend. I don't know what came over me, but I screamed, "Get in the house, now!" My roommate was like, "What's going on?" or something like that. But me, her and the dog ran into the house. When we got to the bottom of the stairs, we both saw these red eyes peering into the crappy little windows we had. I screamed my face off, yelling out for our friend that went home earlier. My roommate's cell phone rings, and it was our friend. He wasn't sure why, but he had a feeling he should call and check on us, and we had him book his ass over to our house. He stayed over almost every night for the next 2 weeks until we moved the heck out of there. I don't know why, but me and my roommate always felt like the landlord who lived upstairs had something to do with our uneasy feelings, and it scared the ever-living crap out of me. 10 years later, and I still get chills down my spine when I happen to pass by that house. When I was younger, about 9 or 10, I lived in a house in New Mexico with a decent-sized property, almost an acre. Where my room sat on the side of the house, we had a large side yard that had our motorhome under a cover. Being as young as I was, my bedtime was about 9 o'clock or so, and my dad was known to do things outside fairly late in the night, and he had a detached garage in the back where he would work on projects. Well, one night, I had just gone to bed, and was laying awake when I saw a strange yellow light outside my window, and I looked out expecting to see my dad and the shadow of the motorhome, but I didn't. I just saw yellow light, and the light filled my entire room so I could see every inch and corner of my room, nothing like a normal flashlight. And I knew for a fact that my dad didn't have a flashlight that bright or that yellow color. As I'm staring at this light for a few minutes, almost like I was stuck in a trance, I see a strange figure in the light. This figure was human-looking, but not quite. Its head was much too large for a normal human, and it was extremely skinny. I was absolutely stunned by this, until it lifted a skinny arm up, held an open hand up, waved, and vanished along with the light. I sat there blinking in the darkness for a second, trying to figure out what I'd just seen. I slowly got out of bed, walked out to the living room to find my dad sitting in his recliner, drinking a beer and watching TV. I stood there for a second, and he looked over at me and asked me what was up. I asked him, "Dad, were you just out by the motorhome?" He says no and asked me why. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to think. I just kind of shook my head and went back to bed. I went out the next day and couldn't find any sign of anything I'd seen the previous night. To this day, I have no idea what I saw or what to think of it. When I was 15, my brother moved out of my mom's house to start college, leaving me the entire top floor. I'd been living in the top floor alone for about a month before I first started hearing weird sounds coming from the hallway and bathroom areas outside of my bedroom. Every day, at some time during the day, I would hear footsteps going away from my bedroom, or a door suddenly shift in its hinges like it does when someone shuts another door and the air pressure changes. Normally, I could only hear the footsteps from outside of the hallway, but some nights I could hear footsteps moving right past me in the hallway. It continued like that for a long time. I spent weeks where I'd investigate every sound and wait in the halls late at night for the footsteps to come by. Then I'd spend weeks ignoring it and blowing it off as a creaky old house. In December of that year, I think I saw what was making the sound. I was falling asleep with my head turned toward the shut door to the hallway. My computer desk was right next to the door, and I could see a blue light next to the power button. I nodded off for a bit, but in a daze I noticed that the blue light was flickering like something was in front of it, and I focused my eyes on a silhouetted man standing between me and the hallway door, looking right at my computer desk. I instantly woke up. I was staring at an intruder and trying to figure out what to do. I decided that I'd just roll out of bed as quietly as possible and make a run for the door, since he left it open when he came in. Before I go any further in the story, I swear this is true, but I know how crazy it sounds. So I attempt to execute my genius runaway plan, but the exact moment I shifted my waist to slide out of bed, the man turned around and looked straight at me. Except he didn't have a face. It was hard to tell at first, but now that we were looking right at each other, I could see he was like a shadowy void from head to toe. I sat up as fast as I could, but faster than I could make it up, he was at the edge of my bed. I rolled backward onto my bed and felt drugged, like I had suddenly been injected with anesthesia or something. I couldn't speak. I was trying to scream for my mom or dad, but every time I tried, all I got were squeaks. I was still staring right at the intruder. He reached out a hand and covered my eyes. I blinked, and he was gone. I could speak and move as normal now, and I jumped out of bed. Nobody was in the room, but the door was still open. I remember shutting the door, and I remember seeing the door shut before I fell asleep, but the door was open when I got up. I have thought about this experience a lot since it happened, and the door is the only thing I can't explain away. I stay away from the dark now, but to this day I still wonder who or what that figure was. My senior year of college, I moved into a large house with 4 people on the first floor, 5 on the second, and 2 people upstairs who we didn't really talk to much. The house was very old but seemed normal enough until I went down to the basement for the first time. There was a washing machine and dryer that never worked, so we had no real reason to ever go down there except for parties. The weird part was this room towards the back of the basement that was always locked, and just gave me an overwhelming sense of terror anytime I was down there. Well, apparently when my roommates first moved in, that room wasn't locked. One of the girls was looking around near the door and found several human teeth and what she described as strange tools. Not long after that, the landlord, who had only recently purchased the house, locked the door, and it was never opened again. Fast forward a couple of months. I had recently woken up from a nap and was cooking some food on the stove, and I was the only person on our floor. Suddenly, the hallway light to my right turns off, and I just shrugged it off, assuming the bulb had burnt out. Then it turned back on. The light switch for that light is in the stairwell on the other side of a closed door, so I waited a minute and the light turned off again. I quickly ran over to the door and opened it, thinking someone had to be messing with me or something. No one was there. I walked downstairs and there was nobody on that floor either. Now I'm a little freaked out, but I still just tell myself it must be an electrical problem. So I go back to my food. Immediately the light goes on and off again. I just kind of stood there for a few seconds. Then the music started. It was coming from the living room, which is right next to the kitchen. Now I'm feeling relieved, thinking that someone is actually home after all. So I walk into the living room, and there is a closed laptop sitting on a ledge near the window, connected to some speakers, and the television was on one of those static channels just like in the horror movies. I slowly walked towards the speakers when I realized the laptop wasn't even turned on. I unplugged the speakers and the music stopped. I really wish I could remember what song it was, but I had other thoughts on my mind at that point. That was when the chill sunk in. I turned off the stove, walked down the stairs, got in my car, and drove away. Fast. A few weeks later, I told my roommates what had happened, hoping that someone would confess to the very elaborate prank they had pulled. Instead, everyone got kinda quiet, and one by one they each started admitting weird stuff that had happened to them. One of the girls said she would often wake up in the middle of the night, and she would hear noises coming from her closet, and sometimes the hangers would be moving like something had just bumped them. Another friend said that he often heard noises, like footsteps above him, but when he walked upstairs, nobody was home. Another guy told us he had woken up in the middle of the night to see a dark figure standing in the middle of our kitchen, just staring into his room before it walked back towards the stairwell and disappeared.